So my talk today is on applying the scientific method to the Biofield anatomy hypothesis. So I am the author of a book called Tuning the Human Biofield, Healing with Vibrational Sound Therapy. I'm the originator of a unique sound therapy method called Biofield Tuning, and also the founder of the nonprofit Biofield Tuning Institute that we set up to study the phenomena that I have encountered in the 21 years that I've been conducting research with sound and the human body. And my book is actually based on my master's thesis that was called Exploring the Effects of Audible Sound on the Human Body and its Biofield. And I have Gary Schwartz to thank for introducing me to the term biofield, because I was looking in PubMed for the words aura and human energy field and not finding anything. And then I read Gary's book and came across the term biofield, which opened up a whole bunch of information for me. So I'm going to talk today about the scientific method and the steps that are in it and how I have been applying it to my working hypothesis. So the first step that we do is we make observations. So what I've been doing for the last 21 years is using tuning forks. I also call them acoustic frequency generators, because there's something about the term tuning fork that makes people's what I call woo bells go off. But basically using single acoustic frequencies and bouncing sound off of people and listening to the signals that come back. And I've made some very interesting observations in the course of doing that. So one of the most interesting things that I noticed right off the bat was I thought that if you activated a tuning fork and you held it near someone, that it would produce a kind of objective sound. And what I discovered was that was not the case at all, that the sound that the tuning fork was producing would actually change dramatically depending on where I was holding it over people's bodies. So sometimes it would go very loud and sharp. Other times it would go soft or disappear. Sometimes it would sound like it was full of static or chaotic tones. And what I discovered over the course of a number of years was that different pathologies seem to make different sounds. So if I bounced a signal off a healthy liver, it came back with a particular tone. But if I bounced it off a fatty liver, for example, it would sound completely differently. Same with something like an arthritic joint. So all pathologies, just like when your car is broken, you know that it's broken because it starts making noise. Your body does this too, only in this incredibly inaudible range. So what seems to be happening is the overtones and undertones that are produced by the tuning fork are intersecting these inaudible waves coming off the body. And you can hear the changes. The fundamental stays the same, but the overtones and undertones change dramatically. And if we had a body up here and I was doing a demo, you would be able to hear these things. It's not subtle. So I also discovered that in addition to pathologies making particular sounds, emotions also did as well. So for example, the emotion of fear produces a waveform that has a kind of quality. So when you are very afraid, that waveform of that emotion animates your body and you begin to shake. Through different kinds of research, I discovered that both animals and plants vibrate in the same language. So this appears to be universal. And it's similar to music, the way that, when you watch a movie, think about Jaws, right? That dun 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 dun, right? And that evokes that fear sense, because that is the same kind of tonal quality of that emotion in your own body. Same with music. If you play a minor third, it evokes a feeling of sadness. And so when someone is sad and you bounce sound off them in a specific spot, you will hear a tone that sounds sad. Interesting thing to observe. I've made many observations, 4 pages of observations. I also discovered, for years I worked close to the body. I worked right over the body. And then about 10 years ago, or about 10 years into my process, I started discovering phenomena out here. And what I discovered was that there actually seems to be a kind of field or medium that surrounds the body. And that this field actually appears to have a boundary. So anytime you have a bubble, it has to have a boundary. And so what I have observed is that about 6 feet off the body, there is an area where there appears to be a greater amount of charge, where a tuning fork actually passed through this boundary will get very loud. And that loud, I've learned to equate with more energy, whatever that energy is, still is yet to be determined. But most interestingly, what I've discovered is that our memories appear to be stored within this field. And I've actually been working with finding memories at their source point. For example, traumatic memories produce very pathological, extreme oscillations within the field, and I'm able to locate them within the field, and I'll talk more about that as we go. But they seem to be magnetically coded in what I've come to see as a kind of binary patterning in standing waves, and these standing waves are bounded by that membrane. So the areas of resistance or turbulence seem to relate to specific memories, and that these areas often have like a resistance in them. Like if you're passing the tuning fork in towards the body and you hit a place where it goes noisy, there's also a feeling like you're encountering resistance. And it's surprising. And even when I've trained over 600 people in this method, everyone's able to find the resistance. And there's a sort of universal surprise at this feeling of actual resistance that's there. And it seems to equate to a certain resistance or tension that's held in the body as well. And so what's fascinating about this is that as we come in and we find, for example, in your biofield, the specific memory of a car accident, we'll find resistance and noise there. But simply holding a tuning fork in this very specific area causes the body to become self-aware of its own noise, and it will spontaneously auto-tune itself. And the resistance that's being held will release, and the distortion in the tone will resolve into coherence. And very often, whatever symptoms that people are complaining of will resolve on the spot. This is a very repeatable experiment that's been conducted many, many thousands of times by me and by my hundreds of students. So the body makes use of the coherent input to tune itself. So the healer isn't doing anything. I consider myself more of a technician than a healer, but it's my job to simply find the noise in the signal and then let the body take care of the rest. So, like I said before, specific pathologies make specific sounds. One of the key components in biofield tuning is something we call an adrenal rhythm reset. So if you are suffering from adrenal fatigue and you go to a naturopath, they're going to push a lot of supplements across the counter at you. If you come see a biofield tuner, we will find the edge of your adrenal field, which is just past your fingertips. We will lock phase with your adrenal rhythm, and we will move in very slowly towards your body, helping your adrenals to become aware that their rhythm is too high and too fast, and give it a steady, coherent input for it to rebalance and re-rhythm itself against. And so the rhythm will go from being too high and too fast and creating stress in your whole system, and it will ratchet back down into its, what I call factory settings. And so just a few treatments of that can cure someone of adrenal burnout. So it's a completely different way of looking at the body, more from a level of rhythms and magnetic fields rather than the sort of chemical, mechanical structure we've all been conditioned to consider it by. So as noise and resistance in the field gives way, the body relaxes and symptoms resolve. Breath, blood, electricity, and information all begin to flow in these areas that have been held or restricted. Most people say they feel lighter after a session, and you can actually see this visibly in their faces. When people sit up from a session, they look lighter, they feel lighter. It seems that what we're doing is helping the body to digest and integrate these traumatic experiences, also called our baggage, things that we carry around, even multi-generational stuff, seems to be able to be resolved by this practice. And certainly, my own observation with myself, having given and received a great many sessions, I've gotten rid of basically every complaint I've ever had and have huge amounts of energy, and I'm able to travel all over the world. I don't get jet lag, and my energy stays up because I've received so much of this work. It's induced a high state of coherence into my own system. So another part of the scientific method is to think of interesting questions. Well, I came up with no end of questions. I've developed, most of this practice developed in a small town in the mountains of Vermont, very much by myself, and making all of these observations and trying to understand the phenomena that I was encountering. So what is this apparent stuff that I can move around with a tuning fork? So when I come in and I encounter resistance and there's a feeling that there's something there, that there's some kind of mass, it's often obvious about that because it gets loud. The tuning fork will get loud in that spot. And very early on, I discovered that I could move these loud spots around, that the tuning fork behaved like a magnet moving iron filings. And so I decided early on that if it was going to be loud anywhere, it probably should be in the midline of the body. I got started in this practice working on the chakra system. So I thought if it's going to be loud anywhere, it should be loud over a chakra. And so I'd find these loud spots and I would drag them, what I call click, drag, and drop, because I could hook into them and drag them and then drop them into the chakra. And if it had been quiet over the chakra previously, after I moved a loud spot into it, it would now be loud over the chakra. So what is this stuff that I'm moving? And what laws of physics really is it that a tuning fork can move this stuff? It's sort of all very curious to me. And as time went on and I was, observing more and more what was going on in the field, I observed this pattern that specific memories appeared to be stored in specific areas. For example, every time a person experiences sadness, you generate the waveform, the pattern that is sadness, and that every time I was working in this area of someone's field, I kept hearing that sad stories, and that they would equate to a person's memory of something sad. But I also discovered that information seemed to move away from the body as it was generated. So information I found at the outer edge of the field seemed to relate to birth, gestation, birth. Information I found close to the body was current or recent, and everything else fell in between like rings in a tree. So if someone was 60 and had a car accident when they were 30, I would find that exactly halfway through their field. Well, this was a very curious thing to discover, and I didn't find that anywhere else. I found no correlations in any literature that I read, and I'm a voracious reader, to what I was finding. So I started wondering if I was making it all up. I had a hard time believing that I was finding something that no one else had ever found. And I was very skeptical about my own discoveries for a long time. So I wanted to know if there was a way to objectively determine if these observations I was making were really there. So I formulated a hypothesis, and basically the Biofield Anatomy hypothesis is everything that I've said, that our mind and memory is actually a bioplasmic and etheric or scalar medium that surrounds the human body. And it's stratified and compartmentalized and timelined, and that stressful experiences create areas of turbulence in this field. So this is the map of the Biofield anatomy. These are all the different areas that when, I can put any one of you on a table and I can run a tuning fork through your field. It's kind of like a needle on an album. And as it goes through your field, it broadcasts all this information. It's a language, and it's a language that I know at this point. So depending on where we find noise or resistance in your field, I can determine the age at which it happened and, what it was related to. So if we found it in this zone, I could say that, something related to your relationship with your mother, for example. So this method has been taught to over 600 people, and this is just an interesting little aside. So one of the organizations that I've followed, and I'm actually speaking at the Electric Universe conference this August. Who's familiar with electric universe theory? Not very many of you. Okay, electric universe theory basically says that electricity, not gravity, is the dominant force in space. And it's very worth exploring. So I would encourage you to search electric universe theory. It's a rabbit hole well worth going down. But in electric universe theory, they deal with plasma. And this is an example of a plasma discharge in a lab. And it's a figure called Squatter Man. And these glyphs are found in every continent around the planet. And what's very interesting is that in the Biofield anatomy, there are also fixed points right here and here in the field. Those are plasma, little areas of dense plasma that I can't move with my tuning fork. But what I can do is I can stick a fork in those, and on the one on the right, and I can tell you all about the personality of your father. On the one on the left, I can tell you all about the personality of your mother. And when I examine the space in between, I can tell you about the quality of your relationship with those parents. We can also shift your relationship with your parents by modulating the frequencies that are present there. So gather data to test predictions. So Every time I hold a class, students come back. We have a multi-layer training, and they come back and say, after my first training, I went out and on my first body, I was able to identify all the years where they had major traumas. So we're able to test this hypothesis out in the field over and over and over again. And they're also getting the same kinds of therapeutic outcomes that I've been getting. This is certainly, it's a model that replicates itself beautifully over and over again. But that's not quite enough for me in the way that my mind works. I want to know more about it. So I've partnered with an organization called CHI, the Consciousness and Healing Initiative, and Doctors Shamini Jain and Richard Hammerschlag, and we've developed a study to possibly determine whether or not this structure is really there. And so what we're doing is we're looking for what's called inter-rater agreement. So we're having 3 practitioners, myself and 2 of my trained students, come in one at a time and do scans on volunteers. And we call out to a research assistant the area, how many inches off the body we find the outer edge of the field, and then these areas of perturbation. So this is data from our pre-pilot, and what we found is quite a lot of correlation, and they got very excited about this data. And so we're getting ready. We're actually working on an IRB to submit for the larger study. We did encounter a problem as far as statistics go. The statistician that we're working with said that, let me just read it. While a visual inspection of spreadsheet data suggests a degree of inter-rater agreement, a measure of statistical significance is needed before proceeding. So I think that's the way research always goes. It's never cut and dry. So we've kind of hit a little conundrum that we're working to figure out, but I'm pretty sure we'll be able to do that. So then the last step is to develop general theories around this. So I've been looking to figure out where does this fit in to other things, and it does fit in quite beautifully with electric universe theory and a lot of the principles of electric universe theory. I spoke last week at the Science of Consciousness conference out in La Jolla, and there was quite a lot of discussion there, a fellow named Stuart Hammeroff and others talking about microtubules and how they found that there are these microtubules present in what are called primary cilia on cell membranes that they are recognizing relates to consciousness. And my opinion is that those are antennae that are receiving and transmitting the information we find in the field. And people who have Alzheimer's, microtubules are starting to fail. So the memories are still there out in the field, but the apparatus for retrieving those memories is no longer working in the body, and that seems to be contributing to Alzheimer's. And then I'm attending conferences like this to meet with other people to introduce this idea to and say, these findings, what else do they fit into? So I'm open to, what other people have to say on the subject.
So I'm interested in comparative analytics. I run a kind of a biofeedback measurement testing system like yourself, and what we're doing all day long is when you take a nutritional supplement, what effect does that do? You do an emotional therapy, what does that do? Dozens of possible things. Prayer, what does that do? So what are you doing to measure how since it's such like an active approach you're doing, how you can manipulate the biofield in a positive direction using a comparative angle?
So and
also, can you heal the biofield, change the biofield at a distance?
Yeah, we can do it at a distance. That's a more interesting question. I didn't think it was possible to do it at a distance, but one of my mentors convinced me to try it. And I discovered that the same field of information that appears when someone is actually on the table will show up when they're not on the table. And so I explained that through scalar, or I use the term ether, that it's all one thing. And so I can pluck the file that is you, and put it on the table, and not only read it, but manipulate it. So that happens. And then as far as testing goes, my fantasy is a $10 million endowment for my lab. And we would have no end of biomarkers and ways to test it. But so far, I've used things like medical thermal imaging, the GDV, biophoton emissions.
I was more interested in what healing options you can do, and then you observe a reaction with your client load.
Well, we treat many, many things. So it's actually, we don't treat people who are very ill because the work produces very strong detox. So
I'm wondering what frequency tuning forks you use, and do you use different frequencies for different parts of the body? Or do you just use one tuning fork for the entire investigation?
So over the years, I've used a great many, and at one point I was using 30 different forks in a session. But then I started destroying them, I started breaking them, kind of by accident, basically because tuning forks aren't designed, they're designed to just kind of make a pure tone. And when I started working in the field, they were getting into heavy distortion all the time, and they were failing. Their structural integrity was going, they were developing buzzes. And so I went through a period where I destroyed most of my forks and was waiting for new ones to come in. And what I discovered was that I didn't need all those frequencies. That basically it's about finding the right place of noise and staying in that for the right amount of time with any coherent input. That said, I use 174 hertz and 528 hertz. Those are the two primary ones I use.
Fascinating work. It's a whole healing input that is often overlooked. It reminded me a lot, the language you use, sort of the structure of some of the healing touch type of practitioners, energy field. And I wonder if you've ever worked directly side by side with a medical intuitive, for example. So they could say what they see happening in the field comparing to what you feel where the tuning fork is vibrating. And when you mentioned that you're working with the Chi Institute, Rosalind Briere would be as ideal a collaborator as you could come up with. Have you thought about looking at that direction?
No, that's on the wish list.
Along with the $10 million.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I don't know if this is helpful or not, but you're using a tuning fork, which is audible sound waves operating through the body. It strikes me, oddly enough, that Emanuel Swedenborg wrote some physiological works back in the 18th century where he described communication processes throughout the body taking place in the form of tremulations in fascial tissue. And modern medicine kind of discarded fascial tissue as items of interest for a very long time, I think until about the last 15, 20 years. So it just strikes me in terms of thinking about potential mechanisms, how sound interacts with the body and the body interacts with the sound, that perhaps there's a role in the vibrational capacities of the fascial tissues that may be useful to think about.
Yeah, I think fascia, collagen, even the quality of the water in the body, like it seems to be happening on quite a lot of levels because it's all vibration. So.
I have a question about the technique. How do you mask out the effect of the second body in the room, the person who's doing the testing?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It's a discipline. You know, we can all have the experience of sitting and talking to someone, but even while you're talking to them, you're thinking about something else, right? You're not really present. You're running a different track. So it's the same thing in biofield tuning, where you actually, as a practitioner, have to learn to go into what we call hollow bone, where you quiet your own vibrations considerably and you listen deeply to the other person. So over practice, practitioners become better and better and better and not creating an interfering signal. And it's part of everybody has bad days, you know, so we encourage our practitioners that if they're having a bad day and they're producing a lot of their own disruptive oscillations, that they shouldn't work because they're going to corrupt the signal.
She has some